had been camping in the woods for a couple of nights, and the routine was starting to feel normal. I had my small tent set up, my sleeping bag stretched out on the ground, and my backpack tucked into the corner. I had been falling asleep each night to the sound of crickets, wind moving through the trees, and the occasional branch cracking somewhere in the distance. That night was no different. I crawled into my bag, pulled the zipper up around me, and tried to settle into the stillness of the woods. I remember the ground being cold beneath me and the smell of damp dirt and leaves filling the tent. My flashlight was turned off, and the only light that reached through the fabric was from the moon. I laid there for a long time, staring into the dark, before sleep finally pulled me under. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer inside my tent. My body was stretched out on a couch, a blanket pulled over me. The first thing that hit me was the smell, warm, like coffee grounds and old wood. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. The walls weren't the thin fabric of my tent anymore. They were painted, with framed pictures hanging neatly. There was a lamp sitting on a table near me, casting a soft yellow glow across the room. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The shift had been too sudden, like I had gone from one place to another without any memory of moving. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. My sleeping bag was gone. My backpack was gone. Even my boots weren't near me. I looked around the room, and everything was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. My head felt heavy, like I had been shaken awake too quickly. I rubbed my face and tried to piece together how I could have ended up there. The last memory I had was zipping myself into the tent and listening to the woods outside. There had been no footsteps, no sound of cars, no voices, nothing that would have hinted at someone being near me. I swung my legs off the couch and placed my feet on the carpet. It was soft, and it almost startled me because I was expecting dirt or cold ground. I stood up slowly, still unsteady, and walked toward the small window across the room. When I pulled the curtain aside, I saw the woods outside, the same woods I had been camping in. Tall, dark trees swaying under the night sky. My chest tightened as I realized I hadn't woken up miles away. I was still near the forest, but now I was inside someone's house. I wandered further into the house, quiet, trying to make sense of where I was. The kitchen had dishes stacked neatly in the sink, and the faint hum of a refrigerator filled the silence. A pair of boots sat by the back door, mud still clinging to the soles. The living room had old magazines spread across the coffee table, and a blanket draped over another couch. The place wasn't abandoned. Someone lived here. As I moved through the hallway, I caught sight of a family photo hanging on the wall. My stomach flipped when I recognized the faces. They were family friends, people my parents had known for years but who I hadn't seen in a long time. That was when the reality of it all started to sink in. Somehow, in the middle of the night, I had been taken from my tent and brought here. I kept trying to work backward in my mind. The tent, the silence of the forest, falling asleep, nothing after that. No memory of anyone approaching, no memory of being lifted or carried. But it had happened. Someone had unzipped the tent, pulled me out, and taken me across the woods without me waking. The thought made my skin crawl. I finally found my parents in one of the rooms. They were asleep, lying on a pull-out bed. It was clear now. They had been the ones to move me. At some point in the night, they had decided the woods weren't safe and had carried me across the forest to this house. Maybe they thought I'd wake up cold, or maybe they'd heard something outside that they didn't want to risk. Either way, they hadn't woken me. They had just picked me up and carried me like a child, even though I was old enough to walk. The relief of realizing it was them should have calmed me, but instead, I felt uneasy. The idea that I had been sleeping so deeply that I hadn't stirred at all as I was lifted, moved, and placed somewhere new unsettled me. My parents had always told me I was a light sleeper, but that night had proven otherwise. Anyone could have done it. Anyone could have pulled me from that tent, carried me into the trees, and I never would have known until it was too late. I stood there for a long time in the hallway, staring at them, my mind running in circles. The fact that I was safe didn't erase the feeling of being vulnerable. That sense of not being in control of my own body lingered, and I knew it would stick with me for a long time. When I went back to the couch, I sat down and wrapped the blanket tighter around myself. The house was warm, but I couldn't shake the cold inside me. Every creak of the wood, every shift of the wind outside made me tense. I thought about the tent still sitting out there in the woods, empty now. I imagined it under the trees, the flap hanging open, waiting for someone who wasn't coming back to it. The image haunted me, like I had left a part of myself out there. Morning eventually came, but the sunlight didn't ease the unease that had settled into me. I walked outside and looked toward the forest, scanning the tree line. Everything looked calm, but my mind replayed the hours I couldn't account for. I had gone to sleep in one place and woken up in another. Even with the explanation, even knowing it had been my parents, I still felt shaken. I realized then that safety wasn't just about being with people you trusted or inside four walls. Safety was about awareness, about knowing what was happening to you. That night had stripped that away. It had shown me how easily I could lose track of myself, how fragile the line between being awake and being helpless really was. For the rest of that trip, I never slept as deeply again. Every snap of a twig outside, every whisper of the wind through the trees kept me hovering on the edge of waking. I didn't trust the dark the same way anymore. Even years later, whenever I thought back to camping, it wasn't the quiet nights under the stars that came to mind. It was the moment I woke up in that house, the gap in my memory, and the heavy realization that I had been moved like I wasn't even there. That single night changed the way I saw sleep in the woods forever. It wasn't the forest that scared me anymore. It was the silence of not knowing, the awareness that in the time I thought I was resting, the world could shift around me without my control. And no matter how safe I seemed, I would never shake the feeling of opening my eyes somewhere new and wondering how I got there. When I think back to that camping trip, the phrase that always comes to mind is that de-escalated quickly. But the truth is, it never felt quick while it was happening. It felt long, stretched out, and every second was filled with the kind of tension you don't forget once you've lived through it. I had gone out with the idea of spending a quiet weekend alone in the woods. I liked being away from the noise of everything else. Just me, my gear, and the trees. I found a spot not too far from a small lake. The ground was soft enough for a tent, and the air smelled clean. I set up camp, cooked something simple over a small stove, and felt that familiar calm settle in as the sun dipped below the tree line. The kind of peace you only get when you know you're far enough from other people to feel truly cut off. That night, though, something shifted. It started with a sound, not unusual in the woods. Branches snap all the time, small animals rustle through leaves, sometimes a deer moves by heavy-footed. But this didn't sound like that. It was slower, deliberate, like someone putting their weight down carefully. I froze when I first heard it, spoon halfway to my mouth. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind leaning into the silence too much. But then it came again, closer this time, and I couldn't push it aside as easily. I let it go after a while, but sleep didn't come easy. I stayed in my bag, eyes open, listening to the darkness press in around the thin fabric of my tent. At some point, I drifted off, but every little noise seemed to wake me again. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I boiled water for coffee, stretched my legs on a short walk, and convinced myself it was nothing more than nerves. By mid-afternoon, I was feeling steady again. The sun was shining through the trees, the lake shimmered, and I thought maybe I'd just let my imagination run too far the night before. That was when I saw someone, a man, stepping out of the trees about 20 yards away from camp. He wasn't carrying a pack. He wasn't dressed like a hiker. He just stood there for a few seconds, watching me. My stomach tightened, and my hands froze on the handle of the pot I was holding. I nodded, a sort of instinctive gesture, though I didn't say anything. He looked back at me, face flat, and then walked off into the trees without a word. It was strange enough to make me uneasy, but I told myself it didn't have to mean anything. Maybe he was just cutting through. Maybe he lived somewhere nearby. I tried to keep my thoughts from spiraling, but they did anyway. He hadn't looked lost, he hadn't looked curious, he hadn't even looked like he cared. He'd just been there, watching me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nerves. Every time I thought I heard something, I tensed. I kept glancing at the edge of the camp, half expecting him to step back out again. When night fell, the air felt heavier. I lay in my tent, staring into the dark, ears straining for every sound. Hours passed, but at some point, exhaustion finally pulled me under. I woke to the crunch of footsteps. They weren't far away this time. My chest tightened as I held still, not daring to move. The sound was steady, circling, as if someone was walking around the tent. My heart hammered so loud I was sure it could be heard outside. I gripped the small knife I kept by my bag, but my hands shook. And then it stopped. Just silence. No retreating footsteps. No snap of branches in the distance. Just gone. I stayed awake until the first light of morning touched the tent. When I unzipped it, the ground around my camp told the story for me. Footprints in the dirt, circling. They weren't mine. They weren't the light scatter of an animal. They were the clear outlines of boots. I knew then that staying wasn't an option. I packed as fast as I could, my hands fumbling with every strap and zipper. I felt exposed, like at any second someone could step back out of the trees. I slung my pack on and started toward the trailhead without looking back. The walk felt endless. Every sound behind me made me turn. Every gust of wind through the branches sounded like footsteps. I pushed myself faster, legs burning, throat dry. I didn't stop until I could finally see the small dirt lot where I had left my car. When I reached it, I saw something that froze me in place. A car was parked right beside mine, though the lot had been empty when I arrived the day before. Old, beat up, with windows too dark to see through. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears as I stood there, scanning the tree line, waiting for someone to appear. But no one came. I didn't waste another second. I got into my car, locked the doors, and started it up with shaking hands. As I pulled away, I couldn't help but glance in the mirror. For a brief second, I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the woods, but the trees swallowed the shape too quickly for me to be sure. The ride home was silent. I didn't play music. I didn't open the windows. My mind kept circling back to the sound of those footsteps in the dark, the calm, blank face of the man who had appeared out of nowhere, and the prints around my tent. That de-escalated quickly. That's how I've always described it, because in the space of a single day, it went from calm to something I couldn't explain. There wasn't a fight, there wasn't shouting, there wasn't even an ending I could wrap up neatly. It just stopped. But the fear didn't stop with it. Even now, years later, when I think about camping alone, I think about how easily things had shifted. One moment I was boiling water for coffee under the sun, and the next I was lying stiff in the dark, listening to someone circle me while I couldn't do anything. It taught me that danger doesn't always crash into your life with noise. Sometimes it just steps out of the trees, looks at you, and walks away like it has all the time in the world. I never camped alone again after that. And whenever I pass by a stretch of woods on a quiet road, I can't help but wonder if someone's in there right now, watching, waiting, moving carefully enough so you'll never know they were there until it's too late. When I was around 8 or 9, my family went on one of those camping trips we always seem to do every summer. It wasn't far from home, just a couple of hours drive, but it felt like a world away when we got there. The campground wasn't anything fancy. It was a small place tucked into the woods with a river close by, and over the years we had turned our favorite little campsite into something that felt almost like a second home. We'd been there so many times that we had paths cleared, spots where we'd put the tents, even a little fire ring that always seemed to be waiting for us when we came back. That trip, though, was different. My aunt and uncle were both away on military tours, so we had their dogs with us. Star and Ariel were bird dogs, big and strong, but most of the time calm and friendly. I remember them being gentle, patient, even when us kids were running around. They'd lay nearby, tongues out, just watching. But that night, I saw a completely different side of them. We'd set up camp like usual, tents pitched, sleeping bags rolled out, food stashed in the cooler. As a kid, that part always seemed fun, helping carry sticks for the fire, feeling like I was part of the process. When we finally settled in for the night, I was tired but not quite ready to sleep. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, listening to the faint chirp of crickets and the low murmur of my mom and grandma still talking outside. Eventually, the sound of voices faded, and the stillness of the woods pressed in. At about 1 in the morning, I woke up to a sound I wasn't used to. Star was growling. Not the playful kind of noise I'd heard when we'd roughhouse with her, but a deep, steady growl that vibrated through the tent floor. I froze. Ariel joined in, low and tense, and my heart started hammering. My mom sat up immediately. Even half asleep, she knew that something wasn't right. I can still picture her reaching for the flashlight, the beam cutting a line through the dark fabric of the tent. She had this quiet but firm way about her, like she was trying not to let us panic, but we could all feel the tension. She grabbed something, probably a tool or makeshift weapon, and unzipped the tent. The sound of the zipper in that moment felt so loud, like it was going to give away our whole presence. The second she stepped out, the dogs moved with her. What sticks in my mind most is how they positioned themselves. They didn't just follow her, they herded her. Every time she tried to step closer to the far side of the campsite, they blocked her path. Star had her hackles raised, teeth bared, and Ariel mirrored her stance. They weren't barking wildly. They were controlled, focused, like they were waiting for something to step out of the darkness. By now, all of us kids were awake, and the air inside the tent was thick with panic. My brothers were crying, and I just remember clutching my blanket and trying to make sense of what was happening. My mom, usually calm, suddenly changed course. She didn't even argue with the dogs. She just made the call. She told us to get up, get our shoes, and get in the car. There wasn't any hesitation in her movements. She was packing up essentials in a rush, tossing things into the trunk, folding the tent as best she could while we scrambled to help. Even Grandma, who always insisted on finishing things properly, didn't argue. It was all instinct, like everyone knew staying wasn't an option. I don't remember every detail of getting into the car, but I remember the feeling of it. The dogs jumped in the back seat last, still on high alert, growling low, scanning the tree line as if something was going to come out at any second. My mom drove fast, too fast for the dark, winding roads leading out of the campground. We all sat crammed in, silent except for the occasional sob from one of my brothers. My stomach churned with fear, and I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see something following us through the trees. Then it got worse. After about 10 minutes on the road, headlights appeared behind us. At first, it didn't seem strange. A car leaving the campground late at night wasn't impossible. But the longer it stayed behind us, the heavier the tension grew. The headlights stayed close, sometimes too close, and even when we turned, the car followed. The dogs sensed it too. Star and Ariel shifted constantly in the back, growling in low, steady tones, never taking their eyes off the rear window. I couldn't see much of the car behind us, but I could see the glow of its lights, always there, never backing off. My mom gripped the steering wheel so tight I could see her knuckles from where I sat in the back. We drove like that for what felt like forever. My brothers were crying harder by then, and I was too scared to even speak. The only thing I could do was make up stories in my head, trying to convince myself it was all a coincidence, that the car behind us was just another family leaving late, maybe just as scared as we were. But the longer it went on, the less I believed it. Finally, the lights of our town came into view. To get there, we had to cross a huge bridge. My heart leapt when I saw it, thinking once we were across, everything would be okay. But right as we started over the bridge, the car behind us slowed down. It didn't follow us across. Instead, it turned sharply, speeding back the way it came. The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming, but it was mixed with confusion. Why would anyone follow us that far just to turn around? It didn't make sense, and that somehow made it even scarier. We pulled into a gas station on the other side of the bridge. Everyone inside the car was on the edge of a meltdown, nerves stretched thin. My mom got out to buy cigarettes, but Star wouldn't let her back in until she stood where the dog could see her clearly, almost like she was double-checking that it really was her. That memory stuck with me, the way the dog seemed to sense things we couldn't, the way it wouldn't relax even when we thought we were safe. We finally made it home, but the feeling of that night never left me. I never forgot the way the dogs behaved, the way my mom reacted, the car that followed us, and how close everything felt to going completely wrong. It was one of those moments that burned itself into my memory, the kind that changes how you see things. Even as an adult now, I can still feel the weight of it when I think back. Camping used to mean fun and freedom, but after that night, the woods never felt the same. I still don't know who was out there, what set the dogs off, or why that car followed us for so long only to vanish at the bridge. What I do know is that it was real, and it was enough to convince me that camping might never be my thing again. That trip showed me how quickly something normal could turn terrifying, how fast a place that once felt safe could twist into something dangerous. And to this day, whenever I think about it, I can still hear stars growl in the back of my mind, warning us that something wasn't right. I still think about that boy sometimes, even though years have gone by. I can't shake it. The memory sits heavy, like a stone lodged somewhere deep inside. The story of that camping trip isn't one I tell often, because it feels wrong to turn it into something casual. It wasn't an adventure. It was something darker, something I still struggle to understand. I was out in the woods on a long weekend trip. The area wasn't far from a small campground, but I had walked a few miles down the trail to set up where I thought it would be quieter. I liked being further away from the buzz of generators and chatter of families. I wanted to hear only the wind, the birds, and the water from the creek nearby. That first evening was peaceful. I had a fire going, cooked a simple meal, and sat back as the sky turned orange and then faded into a deep blue. I thought the weekend would be like many others, quiet, simple, nothing unusual. But the next morning, as the sun came up and I was boiling water for coffee, I noticed someone moving through the trees. It was a kid. He couldn't have been older than 9 or 10. His clothes looked too thin for the cool morning air, and he carried nothing. No backpack, no jacket, not even shoes. His face was pale, his hair messy like he had just rolled out of bed. He stopped when he saw me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. I expected parents to follow behind him, maybe calling out for him, maybe walking slowly with gear on their backs. But no one appeared. It was just him. I remember how quiet it was. No sounds of other campers, no crunch of boots on the trail, nothing. Just the boy standing there. Eventually, he sat down a short distance away, pulling his knees to his chest. He didn't move toward me, didn't say anything, just sat there like he was waiting for something. At first, I thought maybe his family's campsite was nearby, and he had just wandered off early in the morning. I figured his parents would show up soon enough, maybe worried, maybe relieved to find him. I went about my morning, but I kept glancing back, expecting to see adults walking through the trees. Hours passed, and no one came. The boy stayed there, not moving much. The sun climbed higher, and the air grew warmer. I finally walked toward the trailhead, thinking maybe I'd run into his family on the way. I didn't find anyone. No tents, no gear, no voices. The campground itself was further back, but even that felt emptier than it should have been. When I returned to camp, he was still there, still sitting. His arms were wrapped around his legs tighter now, like he was cold even though the sun was out. I remember the pit in my stomach growing heavier. Something wasn't right. By evening, I realized the truth that made my skin crawl. His parents weren't coming back. The longer he sat there, the clearer it became. They had left him. Maybe they had walked off in the middle of the night. Maybe they had gone back to their car and decided not to return. I didn't know, and I didn't want to imagine why. But everything in me said the same thing. This kid had been abandoned. The woods didn't feel calm anymore. They felt hostile, sharp, like every shadow held something I couldn't see. I tried to keep the fire going, but my hands shook as I stacked wood. My own campsite felt unsafe now, like the forest had turned into something else entirely. I couldn't stop thinking about how he must have slept, curled up somewhere alone, waiting for footsteps that never came. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake in my tent, heart pounding at every snap of a branch, every rush of wind. I kept waiting to hear voices, maybe laughter, maybe the sound of someone calling his name. But there was nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you until it's unbearable. When the first light of morning came, I got up and checked. He was still there. He hadn't moved much at all. His face looked hollow, his skin pale in the gray light. He looked like he had spent the night waiting, eyes fixed on the direction his parents had gone, hoping they would return. I can't explain the mix of emotions I felt then. Fear, sadness, anger. Fear because I didn't know why he was there alone. Sadness because no child should be left like that. Anger because whoever left him there had made a choice I couldn't understand. I didn't stay another night. I packed quickly, my hands fumbling with every strap and buckle. The whole time, I kept glancing at him. He didn't come closer, didn't speak, didn't make any move to follow me. He just sat there, waiting. It was the waiting that tore at me the most. I hiked out fast, each step feeling heavier than the last. My chest ached as the trees thinned and the lot where I had left my car came into view. I wanted to believe maybe I had misunderstood, that maybe by the time I left, his parents had come back and scooped him up and everything was fine. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The drive home felt endless. My thoughts circled the same image over and over. The boy sitting alone, knees to his chest, eyes fixed on the trees. His parents never came back for him. And that simple fact haunted me in a way no ghost story ever could. Even now, years later, whenever I go near the woods, that's what comes to mind. Not the beauty of the trails, not the quiet of the nights, but the sight of that child left behind. I never saw him again, never learned what became of him. But I know what I saw out there. I know what happened. Some things stick with you because they scare you. Other things stick with you because they change the way you see the world. That trip did both. I learned that the scariest part of the woods isn't the animals, or the dark, or the unknown noises. It's realizing how cruel people can be, and how sometimes the worst thing you can find out there is the truth that someone left behind what they should have held on to most. And that's why, to this day, I don't camp without thinking of him. His parents never came back, and I'll never forget it. I had gone camping on my own a handful of times before, but every time I did it, I learned something new about how much more vulnerable you are out there than you ever feel back at home. Out in the woods, you can't just lock a door or flip on a light if something doesn't feel right. It's just you, the trees, the sounds you can't always place, and the unknown. On this trip, I learned that lesson in a way I'll never forget. I had driven out to a backcountry spot about 3 hours from home, an area I'd been to once before with a buddy. This time, I wanted solitude. I wanted the kind of silence you only get when you're far enough from any road that you don't hear cars or voices or even airplanes. I parked at the trailhead, hiked in with my pack, and set up camp on a flat patch near a small stream. I had my tent up by late afternoon, gathered firewood, filtered water, and cooked an easy dinner. It was one of those perfect calm evenings. The air cooling down as the sun dropped, the forest quieting, the smell of pine thick in the air. By the time I was ready to call it a night, I felt at ease. I kept my handgun with me, as I always do on solo trips. Not because I wanted to use it, but because being alone out there meant being ready for the unexpected. You never really think you'll need it, but it's something you don't want to be without if the day ever comes. The next morning, I woke up to the first light pushing through the tent fabric. My body was stiff from the ground, my stomach a little unsettled from camp food. I rolled out of my sleeping bag and stretched, then decided I needed to take care of something. Nature was calling. I grabbed the small trowel I carried for digging a hole, headed away from camp about 70 or 80 yards, found a spot near a tree, and started doing what needed to be done. It was one of those moments where you feel as exposed as you possibly can. Pants around your ankles, crouched in the dirt, hoping nobody ever stumbles upon you like that. Out there in the middle of nowhere, I wasn't thinking about people. I was thinking about getting it over with quickly and moving on with my morning. Then I looked up. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The sunlight was still angled low, cutting through branches, and everything looked layered in shadow. But then I saw it clearly. A mountain lion, about 100 feet away, standing dead still, body low, head fixed directly on me. My heart dropped into my stomach. Every thought in my head froze except for one. I was completely vulnerable. Pants around my ankles, squatting in the dirt, no quick way to stand. no way to move fast. And here was one of the most efficient predators in North America, eyes locked on me at my weakest moment. Couldn't look away. I'd read before that you should never run from a mountain lion. Never turn your back. Always make yourself appear larger. But there I was, the exact opposite of large, with my body low to the ground, looking like the easiest target possible. I forced myself to breathe slow and steady, even though my chest was thumping. My hand instinctively went to my side where my handgun was holstered, and I eased it out, keeping it low but ready. The weight of it in my hand gave me just enough calm to think straight. The mountain lion didn't move at first. It just stared. Its tail twitched slightly, muscles tight, the way a cat looks before it decides whether to pounce or walk away. Every second stretched out like an hour. I couldn't tell if it was curious or if it saw me as prey. In that moment, survival instincts overrode everything else. I finished as quickly as I possibly could. One eye locked on the lion the entire time. My hands shook as I tried to get myself back together, fumbling more than once. It was the fastest I've ever done something that normally feels like a drawn-out necessity. Once I had myself together enough to stand, I slowly rose to my feet, never breaking eye contact. I held the gun low but firm, not raising it unless I absolutely had to. My whole body felt like it was vibrating with adrenaline, but I tried to stand tall, to look less like prey and more like a problem the lion didn't want to deal with. Finally, after what felt like forever but was probably less than a minute, the lion blinked, turned its head slightly, and slipped back into the trees. It didn't make a sound, just vanished as if it had melted into the forest. I stood there for a long time, every nerve on edge, gun still in my hand, scanning the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, watching, circling. My mind went to every story I'd read about ambushes, about people never seeing the one that actually attacked. That thought alone sent a wave of fear down my spine. I backed my way toward camp slowly, every few steps glancing behind me, then ahead again, trying to cover all angles. When I reached camp, the relief of seeing my tent, my pack, and the fire pit hit me hard. It wasn't that I thought camp was any safer, it was just the comfort of having my gear, my shelter, and a little more sense of control. The rest of that morning, I couldn't relax. I packed up some of my gear just in case, my eyes constantly darting to the tree line, ears straining for any sound out of place. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me tense. I knew mountain lions were elusive, that they preferred to avoid people, but I couldn't shake the memory of those eyes fixed on me, unblinking, assessing. By midday, I made the decision to cut the trip short. I'd planned for 2 nights, but I couldn't calm my nerves enough to enjoy it. I packed up slowly, methodically, making sure nothing was left behind. My back was prickling the entire time, like I was being watched, even if I never saw it again. The hike back to the car was one of the longest walks of my life. Every step felt heavy, my head on a swivel, my grip on the gun tighter than I wanted it to be. I never saw the lion again, but I carried the weight of its presence all the way out. When I finally reached the car, tossed my pack inside, and shut the door, the relief hit me like a wave. I sat there for a while, breathing hard, replaying it all in my mind. The image of the lion, the way it stared, the tension of that standoff, it was burned into me. Looking back now, I know I was lucky. Lucky I'd brought the gun. Lucky I'd been paying attention. Lucky the lion decided I wasn't worth the effort. It reminded me in the harshest way possible how thin the line is between comfort and danger out there. How quickly a normal morning can turn into a life or death moment. And while I can laugh about it now, about how I've never finished taking a shit so fast in my life, the truth is it shook me to my core. Out there in the woods, alone, at your most vulnerable, you realize just how small you really are and how quickly everything can change. I've been out in the backcountry enough times to know that the woods have a way of humbling you, but nothing prepared me for that morning. I had driven out alone to a remote camping spot I'd scouted a few weeks earlier, somewhere 3 hours from town, along a trail that wound through dense forest and patches of open meadow. It was early summer, the kind of crisp, still air that makes everything smell like earth and pine, and I had been looking forward to a few days of solitude. I set up camp near a small clearing where the sun hit the ground just right, with a little stream nearby. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. The night had been quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, making every small sound more noticeable. I slept in my tent, the mesh ceiling letting me see the stars faintly through the trees. By dawn, I was up and moving, stretching my arms and taking in the air. I had a light breakfast, filtered water, and then the call of nature hit me. I grabbed my small trowel and a roll of toilet paper and headed a short distance away from camp to a secluded spot I often used. I made sure to choose a place with good visibility just in case and began taking care of business. It's one of those moments that, as a human, you feel completely exposed. Pants down, crouched over the ground, every nerve alert, hoping no one or nothing comes into view. That's when I saw it. About 100 feet away, standing still and staring directly at me, was a mountain lion. Its body was low, its tail swishing slightly, but the part that made my stomach drop was the face. Its expression, for some reason, made my mind immediately flash to that weird, grumpy cat face meme I'd seen online before. The one where the cat's cheeks puff out and its eyes are half-lidded in judgment. I remember thinking, almost absurdly, that this predator, one of the fastest and most efficient in North America, was looking at me like it was judging my choice of bathroom location. The contrast of its lethal presence and the ridiculous human-like expression made my chest tighten with disbelief and fear at the same time. I froze. Every muscle in my body went taut. I had my handgun with me, of course, but being caught in the middle of the woods, pants down, squatting, was as vulnerable a position as possible. My mind raced, cataloging everything I had read about mountain lions. Don't run, make yourself look bigger, maintain eye contact. But the absurdity of imagining that cat face stuck in my head, overlaying a mortal threat, made me feel like my brain was scrambling. I forced myself to finish as fast as I could. Hands shaking, eyes locked on the mountain lion. I barely breathed until I was done. The adrenaline hit me in waves, every part of my body trembling as I gathered my paper and used the trowel to cover up. Even though my logic told me not to panic, I couldn't stop imagining that expression. Half curious, half annoyed, as the lion considered its options. Once I was able to stand, I kept my eyes fixed on it. My breathing slowed only slightly, but my hands gripped the gun firmly, ready if it made any sudden move. I couldn't believe how exposed I had been, how quickly a moment of normalcy, going to the bathroom in the woods, had turned into a standoff with a top predator. I tried to appear calm, tried to make myself look as big as possible without making any sudden movements, but every step I took backward toward camp felt like walking a tightrope. The mountain lion didn't move at first. It didn't approach, it didn't turn away. It just watched, and I could see every muscle in its body, coiled and ready. Every twitch of its tail, every shift in its stance made me reassess my own position, calculating what I would do if it decided I looked like easy prey. For a long time, though in reality it could have been only a minute, it just stayed there, staring with that ridiculous, almost human expression I couldn't shake from my mind. Eventually, it blinked, and then, slowly, it turned and slipped into the trees. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It just melted away, leaving me alone in the clearing with my racing heartbeat and sweaty palms. I didn't move for a long time, standing there and listening. Every leaf rustle, every snapping twig made me jump. I checked every direction, convinced it might circle back, but the forest seemed normal again, quiet in the way it had been before the encounter. I walked back to camp slowly, keeping the gun low but ready. My legs were still shaking, and I could feel my stomach tightening again. Not from fear this time, but from the adrenaline. When I reached my tent, I let myself breathe fully for the first time. I had made it back. The tent, the fire pit, my pack. They were all still where I left them, and the reality of the morning started to sink in. The rest of that day, I couldn't relax. Every sound in the woods made me jump. I double-checked my surroundings every time I moved, kept the gun within reach, and avoided going too far from camp. Eating, filtering water, and even sitting by the stream felt tense. All because of that split-second encounter and that ridiculous expression that had haunted my imagination. By nightfall, I decided to pack up most of my gear. I couldn't shake the tension, and the thought of being alone in the woods with another predator, or the same one. Still out there was more than I wanted to deal with. I carefully loaded everything into my pack, always checking over my shoulder, always scanning the trees. The walk back to the trailhead was slow, methodical. My senses felt raw, heightened by the morning's event. Every bird call, every snap of a branch felt magnified. When I finally reached my car and sat down behind the wheel, the relief was overwhelming. I could feel my body finally start to unclench, but the memory of that face, the mountain lion staring at me, the absurd judgment in its expression, stayed with me. It was one of those moments that blends terror with surreal humor, the kind you can't fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. Driving back, I kept the woods in my rearview mirror, thinking about how quickly a normal activity could become life-threatening. That morning taught me a lesson I won't ever forget. Even in the most mundane moments, nature is in control, and your sense of safety is often just an illusion. The absurdity of picturing that face on such a powerful animal didn't lessen the fear. It highlighted it in a way I've never experienced before. Even now, when I think back to that trip, I can't separate the terror from the ridiculousness. That mountain lion, in all its power and grace, looking at me as I was completely helpless, will always be burned into my memory. And while I can laugh a little at the ridiculous mental image, the lesson is serious. Out there in the wilderness, even the smallest moment of vulnerability can become life or death, and respect for the creatures around you is never optional. It made me a lot more careful in the backcountry after that, always aware of my surroundings, always keeping a hand on my gear, always thinking about what could be watching. Even when I'm just doing something as basic as taking a moment in the woods. That trip didn't stop me from camping, but it changed how I approached it forever. I'll never forget that camping trip in Washington, not because of anything dangerous or life-threatening, but because it completely rattled me in a way I didn't expect. My family and I had driven up from Oregon in the early summer, hoping to get away from the city for a long weekend. We packed up the car with tents, coolers, and enough snacks to last a small army, and set out for a state campground nestled in the Cascade Mountains. The drive itself was beautiful, winding through pine forests and past glacial streams, with the smell of wet earth and wildflowers thick in the air. We arrived late in the afternoon and found our favorite campsite, the one we'd claimed years ago. It was near a small clearing with a few tall pines around it, enough shade for our tents, and a perfect view of the lake just a short walk away. We set up camp slowly, my parents taking their time to pitch tents and organize supplies while my siblings and I explored the surrounding area. Everything felt calm and peaceful, the kind of quiet that only exists in a well-forested camping area away from highways and cities. That night, after a simple dinner cooked over the fire, we all went to bed early. The air had cooled down significantly, and the smell of pine needles mixed with smoke from the dying fire filled the tent. I remember drifting off to sleep with the sounds of the forest all around me. The faint rush of water from the nearby stream, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional distant call of a bird. Everything was normal, almost perfect. Then, just after midnight, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. I thought maybe I had heard something brushing against the tent. Then it started again. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Something was hitting the car outside. At first, I assumed it was another camper, maybe someone moving around or a branch falling. But the sound repeated, deliberate, coming from directly above the car. My heart started racing. I unzipped the tent quietly and stepped outside, careful not to wake anyone. That's when I saw it. A squirrel perched high in one of the pine trees near our campsite, and it was absolutely livid. It had a pine cone in its tiny paws, and every few seconds it would launch the cone straight at the car with surprising accuracy. When it missed, or maybe intentionally, the squirrel would scold loudly, chattering and flicking its tail in pure frustration. I realized quickly that the noise I had heard wasn't a branch falling. It was this small creature, apparently intent on making life miserable for anyone nearby. The squirrel didn't stop at pine cones. Every so often, it would grab a stick, shake it aggressively, and throw it down toward the windshield. The sound of wood hitting metal echoed through the campsite, bouncing off the surrounding trees and making it feel like something bigger and more sinister was happening. I froze for a moment, heart pounding, because at first, the shadows in the dim light made it feel like someone was intentionally throwing objects at our car. My mind raced, picturing a figure lurking in the trees, a prankster or something more threatening. But as my eyes adjusted and I focused, I realized the culprit was a tiny, red-brown squirrel with a ferocity I had never seen. I ducked back into the tent and woke my siblings quietly, whispering that it was just a squirrel before my parents woke. I peeked back outside, and sure enough, it was still up there, launching pine cones with an almost military precision. I noticed something about the way it moved. It was completely focused, using its tail for balance, hopping along branches like it was rehearsing each throw. There was a strange intelligence in its actions, almost like it was strategically trying to make our night miserable. By now, my parents were up too. My mom tried to calm everyone down while my dad went outside to see if he could shoo it away. But as soon as he stepped close to the car, the squirrel started hurling more objects, and my dad had to duck repeatedly. It was unnervingly accurate for a wild animal so small. My brother clutched his blanket like it was a shield, and I could hear my sister giggling nervously, half in fear, half in disbelief that a tiny creature could command such chaos. Eventually, my dad gave up, realizing the squirrel wasn't going to leave on its own. We sat inside the tent, watching as the tiny fury continued to launch pine cones and sticks at the cars around the campsite. Other campers stirred, some shouting at the tree, others trying to cover their cars, but the squirrel was relentless. Its determination made it feel almost malevolent, not dangerous in the way a bear or mountain lion would be, but unnervingly persistent. The woods themselves seemed to amplify every sound. The ping of a stick hitting a bumper, the thud of a pine cone against the roof, the tiny scolding chatter of the squirrel, echoing like a warning. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the squirrel planning its next attack, watching us like a tiny sentry above the campsite. Every rustle in the trees or distant sound made me tense. Even in the calm daylight, the memory of that precision and focus sent a chill down my spine. By morning, the squirrel finally left, probably in search of breakfast. My dad inspected the car. Nothing was seriously damaged, just some dents and scratches. But the tension from the night lingered. The experience had reminded me that being out in the wilderness doesn't just mean worrying about big predators. It also means respecting even the smallest creatures, because they can make life unexpectedly chaotic. We spent the rest of that trip on edge, constantly checking the trees, always watching the movement above us. Camping, which had always felt calm and safe, now carried a new layer of awareness for me. Even though the squirrel was tiny and harmless, the way it dominated our campsite for hours made it feel like a force to be reckoned with. When we left, I looked back at the pine tree where it had perched, half expecting to see those bright eyes staring down at us again. It never returned, but I still remember that night clearly. The sound of pine cones bouncing off metal, the tiny fury of the squirrel, and the way it turned a peaceful camping trip into something tense and surreal. That trip changed how I think about being out in the woods. I learned that danger, or at least chaos, doesn't always come in the form of predators or storms. Sometimes, it comes in a tiny, pissed-off squirrel, armed with sticks and pine cones, determined to remind you that even the smallest creatures can make you feel completely at their mercy. From that day on, every time I set up camp near tall pines, I make a point of checking above, listening carefully, and keeping an eye out for the unexpected. It might sound funny, and it is in hindsight, but at the time it was terrifying. The woods are unpredictable, and that little squirrel taught me that lesson in a way I'll never forget. When I think back on that camping trip, it still unsettles me how something so harmless could spiral into something that made my skin crawl for days afterward. It all started as nothing more than a simple weekend trip to get away from the noise of town. I wanted a quiet break, just a few days out in the woods where I could sit by a fire, listen to the trees creak in the wind, and maybe cook some food over the coals. I packed light: a small tent, my sleeping bag, a single burner stove, a cooler with some food, and a couple of odds and ends. I wasn't planning anything extreme, just a calm, simple couple of nights outdoors. The first night went as planned. I hiked a few miles off the road and set up camp near a patch of pines that gave me shelter from the wind. It wasn't the most scenic spot, but it felt private, and privacy was what I wanted. After a meal and some time staring into the flames, I settled into my sleeping bag. The forest was silent, aside from the faint rustle of branches and an occasional crack far off, probably a deer or a raccoon. The next morning, I woke early. The air was damp, and the ground was cold under my boots when I climbed out of the tent. I boiled some water for coffee and started planning what to eat. My cooler had some tortillas, cheese, and a bit of leftover chicken. I figured I'd make myself a quick quesadilla on the pan I'd packed. Simple, easy food, something warm to get the day started. I set the pan on the little burner and got the tortillas ready. The smell of cheese melting and chicken heating up spread through the camp. It was one of those smells that makes your stomach growl even when you're not hungry. I crouched by the pan, flipping the tortilla carefully so it browned without burning. That's when I noticed something odd. Just beyond my camp, through the trees, I thought I saw movement. It wasn't much, just a flicker of something pale against the darker trunks. At first, I thought it was sunlight hitting a branch or maybe a bird cutting through the trees. I stood up, squinting into the forest, but whatever it was had already slipped away. The woods went still again. I sat back down and tried to shake it off. It's easy to spook yourself when you're out there alone. Every little sound feels bigger. Every shadow seems to move. I told myself it was nothing and focused on finishing breakfast. The quesadilla came out just right, crisp edges with the cheese gooey inside. I ate it fast, enjoying the warmth against the cool air. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Even as I packed things up and got ready to hike a little deeper into the woods for the day, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The trees looked the same in every direction. Tall, thin trunks with patches of undergrowth. But I couldn't shake the idea that someone was back there, staying just out of sight. I walked for a while, following a narrow deer trail that wound deeper into the forest. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear footsteps or voices, just birds and the occasional snap of a branch under my own weight. After a couple of hours, I circled back toward camp. I figured I was just letting my imagination run away with me. When I got back, though, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Everything was still there, tent, cooler, stove, but the order of things seemed slightly different. The cooler had been shifted a little, not much, just enough that I noticed it. The pan I'd left on top of it was now sitting on the ground. My backpack looked like it had been nudged to the side. None of it screamed danger, but it was enough to make my stomach knot. I crouched by the cooler and opened it. Everything was still inside. The remaining tortillas, cheese, a couple bottles of water. Nothing was missing, at least not that I could tell. But the fact that someone, or something, had been in my camp while I was gone made me uneasy. That night, I built a fire again. The flames crackled, and sparks floated up into the dark sky. I tried to focus on the sound, on the comfort of the light, but I couldn't stop scanning the edges of the woods. My eyes kept searching for that flicker of movement I'd seen earlier. I heated up another quesadilla for dinner, the same simple meal as breakfast. As I ate, I thought about the way the cooler had been shifted. If it was an animal, why hadn't it taken anything? If it was a person, why just move things slightly and leave them behind? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. At some point, I turned in for the night. I zipped myself into the sleeping bag, but sleep didn't come easy. Every rustle outside the tent made me tense up. I lay there with my ears straining against the silence, my heart beating faster at every sound. Hours seemed to crawl by before I finally drifted off. When I woke, the air inside the tent was damp with condensation. I sat up and unzipped the flap, expecting the same quiet forest. Instead, I froze. On the little camping table I had set up near the fire pit, there was a tortilla folded in half. It looked just like the ones I had made the day before, except this one was raw, just cheese between two cold tortillas. It wasn't mine. I hadn't made it. I hadn't left it there. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Someone had been in my camp again, not just shifting things around this time, but deliberately preparing food, copying exactly what I had done. Whoever it was had done it while I slept, only a few feet away from where I lay in my tent. I didn't eat breakfast. I packed everything up in a rush, shoving my gear into the backpack without bothering to fold or organize. My hands shook as I broke down the tent. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone step out from the trees. The hike back to the car felt endless. Every sound made me flinch, and every patch of shadows looked like it was hiding someone. By the time I reached the road, my shirt was damp with sweat, and my legs ached from moving so fast. When I finally slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors, I sat there for a long time, just breathing. I kept thinking about that cold quesadilla sitting on my table, about how close someone must have been to me while I slept. The idea of it made my skin crawl. I never went back to that spot. I don't even like cooking quesadillas anymore. The smell of melting cheese in a tortilla, something that once made me think of comfort and simplicity, now takes me right back to that morning. It reminds me of waking up in the woods and realizing I wasn't alone, that someone had been close enough to watch me, to mimic me, to leave behind something that felt like both a warning and a message. That camping trip was supposed to be about peace and quiet, but it ended with me realizing something far worse, that the most unsettling thing in the woods isn't the dark or the animals. It's the thought that someone could be out there, silent, careful, watching every move you make, and you wouldn't even know until they wanted you to. I still remember that camping trip in Arizona like it happened yesterday, even though it was years ago. My friends and I had decided to do a group camping trip in the middle of nowhere, somewhere far outside Tucson, where the landscape was a mixture of jagged rocks, scrubby desert brush, and those endless dry washes that twist through the hills. We'd all been excited for weeks. None of us were super experienced campers, but that made it fun, or at least we thought so. We packed up tents, coolers, sleeping bags, and enough beer to supply a small festival, loaded everything into trucks, and drove out past the last gas station for miles, where cell service faded into nothing. By the time we arrived at the campsite, it was already late afternoon, the sun low, painting everything in a dusty red glow. We picked a flat area in a small clearing, surrounded by desert brush and a few scraggly mesquite trees. We set up tents, arranged coolers, and stacked firewood for the evening. As the sun set, we built a fire and laughed, drank, and swapped stupid stories about other trips. The desert is beautiful at dusk, the shadows stretching long and the sky a rich gradient from orange to deep blue. I remember thinking it was perfect, that we'd be completely alone, safe out here in the wide open space. That night, everyone turned in early. The air cooled rapidly, and the desert night became almost eerily quiet, aside from the occasional distant coyote yip. I was just falling asleep when I heard it, a soft sniffing sound right outside our tent. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was a coyote, maybe some animal that wandered onto our site because someone forgot to tie up the garbage. I remember thinking, great, probably just a raccoon or a bear, and trying to push the feeling of unease out of my mind. Then the sniffing sound moved. Slowly, deliberately, it went to the tent next to ours. That's when the panic started. Every one of us inside our tent was suddenly awake. Without speaking, we all recognized what was happening. We were quiet, holding our breath, listening as the faint scrape of boots or claws moved outside, accompanied by the occasional sniff. The seconds stretched out into what felt like hours. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, sweat breaking out despite the cool desert night. Then a sudden noise erupted from the next tent over. One of our friends popped out, yelling and waving his arms, even firing off a shot into the air from his handgun. The idea was to scare off whatever animal or intruder we thought was outside. We all froze, tense as hell, waiting for some reaction. That's when it became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't an animal. The sniffing, the movement, the way our coolers had been rifled through, it was a person. Some guy had sneaked onto the campsite, going through our food, looking into tents, and acting like it was perfectly normal. Our friend with the gun chased the guy off, shouting and waving, and finally, the desert swallowed him up. The relief was immediate, but it didn't make the night any less nerve-wracking. We all grabbed what we could and packed our tents and gear as quickly and quietly as possible. I remember the dry Arizona sand crunching under our boots as we moved, the stars above us impossibly bright because there were no city lights anywhere nearby. By the time we had the last of our things loaded into the trucks, everyone was shaken. There was no lingering around the fire that night. We drove back toward the nearest highway as fast as we dared, checking every shadow along the road for movement. We swore never to return to that spot. But, of course, a year later, we were all convinced the first incident had been a fluke, a weird one-time encounter with some random creep. So we went back to the same general area, trying to be smarter this time. No tents, no sleeping bags spread on the ground. Instead, we all planned to sleep in the backs of our trucks and SUVs, thinking a vehicle would be impenetrable, safe, and much less likely to be sniffed by anyone or anything. The first night was quiet, too quiet. I remember lying in the back of my SUV, my girlfriend next to me, the interior warm and comfortable. The desert around us was black and silent, and for a while I thought we might actually be okay. Then it happened again. A bright light appeared, shining directly on my face. My immediate reaction was to wake up, yell, maybe scare off whoever it was. But I froze, my instincts telling me to pretend to be asleep. If this was another person, I didn't want them to know we were awake. I held my breath, feeling the pulse in my temples, listening carefully. The person moved to the next truck, shining their flashlight into each vehicle, staring at everyone inside. I could hear faint shuffles of clothing, the soft sound of my friends pretending to be asleep. My stomach tightened, and I felt a cold sweat break out as the reality sank in. Some guy had returned. The same area, the same vulnerability, but this time we had made it slightly harder for him. Eventually, the light moved off toward the edge of the campsite. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I waited until I was sure he had gone, then bolted from the SUV, waking up my friends one by one. Everyone was panicked but alive, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We didn't stop to pack anything else. We threw the remaining items into our vehicles, jumped in, and didn't look back until we were on the paved highway and heading toward town. Both trips left me with a very clear lesson about camping in remote areas, especially around Tucson, Arizona. The desert is beautiful, but isolation is a double-edged sword. No cell service, no other campers around, and no one to hear you scream if something goes wrong. It's not ghosts or fairy tales that make it scary. It's the real human element, the unpredictability of people who wander into your campsite uninvited, and the knowledge that when you're out there, you are truly alone. We never went back after the second incident. Every time someone suggests camping out there again, I remember the sound of sniffing outside the tent, the flashlight shining on us in the dead of night, and the adrenaline-fueled rush of bolting out of a truck to wake my friends. The desert isn't forgiving, and neither are people who have no boundaries. From that point on, I always double-checked my campsite, kept vehicles locked, and never assumed the wilderness itself was the only threat. The lesson wasn't about being afraid of the desert. It was about respecting the fact that when you're in the middle of nowhere, it's not just animals that you need to worry about. It's the people who might be out there, just as alone and unpredictable as you are. And that realization, more than anything, is what made those nights in Arizona so terrifying and unforgettable.